One of the biggest challenges for creating case studies is getting customers to participate. A lot of companies have policies that preclude their employees from participating in case studies, giving testimonials, talking publicly about the types of software and systems that they use. The reality is we live in an incredibly litigious society, and one of the ramifications of that is a fear of anything that could put a company at risk of litigation. Our goal as marketers when we approach a customer, for the smallest testimonial to the most elaborate case study, is to make it easy to say yes. Now, sometimes you get everything you want and you can do a public case study, we'll talk about doing events, joint webinars. Sometimes you get the whole enchilada and it's wonderful. But sometimes you have to work within the limitations of the customer's capability. Some experts say that the very first thing you should do when you're working on a case study is to get that upfront agreement that your case study can be public. Realistically, that's not always going to be possible. So if you only do big marquee companies that are willing to do splashy public testimonials and case studies, you won't have any. So it's important to work within the parameters of what your customer can agree to. Make it easy to say yes. One option is to make it a named case study versus an anonymous case study. We've had instances where evangelist customers really wanted to talk to us and help us with case studies as we were growing software products, but they just couldn't. Their hands were tied. So by making it an anonymous case study, we were able to tell their story, but with a little bit less detail and without naming the company. We still had great stats, we still had great information, we just couldn't say the name of the company. Particularly with large companies, you may have to settle for that. Sometimes it helps if you can choose between an internal and a public case study. In one instance, we had a group at a customer who was using our product in really interesting and amazing ways, but they couldn't do a public case study. Some of the ways they were using our product was actually creating a competitive advantage for them, so they didn't want to talk publicly. But what the team did do was give a presentation about how they were using it to other groups within their company. That led to a lot of follow-on sales for us. Even though we couldn't talk publicly about what they were doing, we were able to talk to other audiences within the same organization. Now, if you have a very large marquee customer, in this case, they had tens of thousands of people in the IT department that we were selling to. So, that was a pretty large target audience for us to reach, even with an internal communication. Another way to get approval and buy-in for participating in a case study is to tie it in with an event. I've had instances where companies I was working with did joint presentations with the customer in a non-salesy way at industry events. That shows the expertise of the individual, it shows the innovation of the company, and guess what? The vendor behind the scenes can do the heavy lifting to get the presentation ready, to pitch the topic to the show. Centering it around an event is a great way to get buy-in from your customers and approval from their higher-ups in their organization. Another way to make it easy to say yes is to make the information shareable by your customer. The more you make them look great, the more likely they're going to be comfortable sharing the information. Another way to get around the problem of named versus anonymous case studies is to use aggregate data. So you can survey a number of different customers and only pull out small quotes for certain ones that are anonymous. So you have the power of a large group experience and the power of individual stories without having to worry about whether one customer is going to say yes or no, you can use it. One of the most important strategies for getting approval and building your pipeline of customer case studies is to work closely with your sales team. Sometimes it's really hard to get sales on board. Some salespeople are gung-ho, anxious to get as many case studies as possible. Others will complain about not having any case studies, but won't help you get the permissions secured at all. Ideally, you want to write it into the contract for a large deal that the person will agree to a case study. This is a very good sales negotiating tactic. If the salesperson has to give a discount or softer terms in a deal, adding in the ability to do a case study can be a very good negotiating tool for the salesperson. Talk to your salespeople and see what you can work out for your company and what makes sense for their selling process. Pre-interview research. Before you start interviewing customers for your case studies, you want to take a little bit of time to do some research to understand more about the people that you'll be speaking with and the companies that they work for. It's not unlike the research you might do for a job interview. You want to understand what that person's role within the company is. What are they responsible for? How do they fit within their company? You want to determine how their position helps increase revenue, decrease cost, or improve efficiency for the company. Those are the three primary drivers for business-to-business purchases. So if you can tie back how your solution helps them solve one of those problems or one of those objectives, it's going to be a much more powerful case study. Now, obviously, if that's not relevant to what you're offering, you can't tie it back. But where at all possible, you want to hit something related to those key metrics. Make sure you take a look at the person's LinkedIn profile to get an idea of how they describe their job. Look at the company's LinkedIn profile page. Look at other people within the same department at the company, understand what their different roles are. It really helps sometimes if you're not familiar with the role that the person is in. You can look at similar people in the same role at other companies that are in that person's industry. When you look at a variety of profiles, you'll get a better idea of where that person's coming from and what their professional objectives and challenges are. Also, definitely Google the person. You might find an industry article that they've written, a presentation at an industry publication. You might find a presentation at an industry event. You never know what you're going to find that could give you background information to help you craft better questions and write a better case study. In addition, if you have a CRM, you want to take a look at the notes associated with that person. Look at their activities if you have marketing automation. What have they shown interest in? How have they engaged with your company? Take a look at the opportunity notes. Oftentimes that'll give you background information about why they liked your product, who you were competing against. And definitely talk to the salesperson who managed the sale. The best salespeople find out a lot about their customers, and they should be able to give you some pertinent information about how the deal went and what some of the deciding factors were and some of the objectives. You may be surprised at how much insight your salesperson can give you. This information will be very helpful for crafting the best questions and capturing the best information from your customer. Plus, the more you prepare, the more you decrease the probability that you're going to look stupid in front of the customer, which is always to be avoided. Preparing your questions. Tips for optimizing your interview. As you're going into the interview, there are a number of tips that you want to keep in mind to help you get the most out of that conversation. First of all, try to put your guest at ease. Sometimes people are nervous when they're doing these kinds of interviews, and the more you can be friendly, professional, and put them at ease, the better the content will be that you capture. The way you structure your questions will help determine the course of your interview. Ideally, you want to put more straightforward questions at the beginning and more sensitive or more personal questions at the end, because the longer someone speaks with you, the more at ease they'll become, and you'll get better information that way. If you put a hard question or a personal question at the beginning of the interview, it's a little bit off-putting, and you might not get the same level of candor that you would get 15 or 20 minutes later in the conversation. Also, be mindful of the person's schedule. Accommodate your guest by choosing a time they can be reached by phone or Skype and speak without interruption. Optimizing your interview. As you're planning your interview, there are a few strategies you can use to help optimize the information that you get during that critical time period. You only have a short time to speak with the customer, so you want to make sure that you're getting the maximum value of that time so that you don't have to go back to them later or you don't get enough information to write the best case study. First of all, be mindful of their schedule and how it's going to impact your interview. Try to accommodate your guest by choosing a time they can be reached by phone or Skype or GoToMeeting or however you're going to interact with them at a time when they can speak without interruption. You don't want to schedule it at lunchtime when they might be distracted by eating. You don't want them to plan it right before a meeting or right at the end of the day when they might have to rush out. Try to schedule at an opportune time when neither of you will be interrupted. Ideally, your client will start to loosen up about 5 to 10 minutes into the interview. Try to put them at ease and definitely save more personal questions or more difficult questions for the middle and the end of the interview. The more you speak, the more they'll become relaxed and comfortable speaking with you, and you'll get better candor if you ask those more difficult questions toward the end of the interview than if you put them at the beginning. Also, as you're speaking, use silence strategically. Don't shy away from silence. Give your customer time to think and consider and reflect before you jump in with the next question. The pressure of silence gives many people the need to fill it. So by allowing the silence to stretch for a second or two, you're encouraging them to speak more. And the more they speak, the more good information you'll have versus if you're talking. Let your customer fill the silence with information, quotes, things they might not have thought of earlier in the interview. You never know what you'll learn. And keep your key benefits map on hand. Ideally, have a printout of the key messages that you want to hit right alongside your question list. If you see an opportunity to really drive a point home, ask an in-context question about one or two of the benefits specifically. Remember, unless you're recording this for a podcast or some sort of live interview question, you're just going to edit this out or build it into the rest of the content. So capturing that information, even in a very raw form, can be valuable. And remember, it's in your best interest to record the interview if your customer is amenable to that. First, you'll be able to quote them with more accuracy and find hidden gems in the content that you missed when you were listening to it the first time. Second, recording makes it easier for you to really listen to what the customer is saying. You're not distracted by having to rapidly take as many notes as possible.